G'day guys, how's it going? So I had a question from a good mate yesterday asking how I draw my supply and demand zones, how I identify them. Anyone who's seen my charts will know that I use predominantly supply and demand zones. I do use support and resistance occasionally, but for the most part, I'm very much a zone trader. Absolutely love them. So I thought I'd whip up a quick little video showing how I put them on my chart. Now, the first thing to know is the actual tool that I use to draw them. So I use the parallel channel tool, which you'll find in the second section on the left. Now, when I use it, a really handy tip is if you hold shift, it locks it to 45-degree increments. So it'll, do 45, 90, 0 degrees. That way you know that you're drawing them in horizontally. It's just a really handy tip. So when you actually want to identify and draw your zones, you're looking at pivot points. So you can see here, there's a huge pivot in the market. We're currently on the weekly charts. That's about how I would draw the market. So if I'm looking for the pivot points, I would be looking here where we pivoted up. And then for me to draw my zone, I'll often look for where price consolidates and then moves up out of the consolidation. So that would technically be here. That's where we've really moved up. We sort of got held at this level, got held at that level for a while. And then when we finally broke that, this was the point. Now, I would actually draw two zones in here. I would put a weekly zone here because I like to go off the candle before we moved up out of it. But I would also draw a weekly zone here because I'm a really big fan of drawing them off bullish engulfings. So finding the candle before a bullish engulfing to draw them on. And the fact that we've retested that zone makes me really like the look of that. So you can see we pushed up out of it and we came back in. Now, when I actually draw my zones, you'll see I don't include the wick to the upside. So in a demand zone, which is it'll always be underpriced. So that's where people are happy to buy. I draw my zones from the bottom wick to the top of the body, but I ignore the wick to the upside. I've learned supply and demand from quite a few different traders, all of them unreal. Everyone does it a little bit differently. I probably do it differently to everyone I learned from because I probably, amalgamated a bunch of different methods from each of them. So Donnie will teach it a bit differently. The guys from UTG, who I'll flick a thing in the description below, they teach it a little bit differently. And Atlas Forex, who is an absolute wizard with them, he draws them in a bit differently to me again. You'll figure out what works for you. You'll find what you like as you play around with them. But the thing is, all of us probably draw them in the same spot. It's just the width will be slightly different based on what we look for, what we think. So I would have these two zones marked in. And like I said, I ignore that wick to the upside, which is why mine's drawn as it is. Now, what I like to do is refine my zones. So if we've got these weekly zones, right? And we come in, I'd be looking for daily zones. So let's say the price is here and I'm trying to figure out where I want to buy next. I come into my zone and I look for a daily zone within this weekly one. So for me, there is a pretty good zone here in the sense that, where's my daily? Because you can see we consolidated and then we pushed up out, we came back, we retested. So I love to see the retest. For me, that really adds strength and confidence to where I think the zone is. So you can see we've had that perfect retest. Again, you can see I've ignored the wick to the upside on this move. I've just gone off those wicks to the downside and the bodies. So I would be confident that there's a daily zone there. Now, you might wonder how long zones hang around for, because you can see we set this zone in March of 19. Who knows? Because you're assuming that there's still going to be buy orders there. You're assuming that zone is full of buy orders. That's why it's a zone. Now, the question of how long those buy orders are going to sit there is a very fair question. But you'll find, if you come across, when we had that massive crash for Corona, where'd we come? We came to that daily zone to the, I don't know about to the dollar, but I mean, look at that. That is absolutely perfect. So they definitely hang around for a while. Like that's a full year that zone was there based on the daily candles. and you can just see the accuracy of them. I mean, there was certainly zones on the way through that it just blew through, but at the end of the day, it stopped on this zone. So we'll have a look at the current price. Now, it's impossible to find a weekly supply zone on Bitcoin at the moment because of the fact we're at an all-time high. So we haven't had a pivot to draw a weekly zone in. But what we have got is weekly demand levels. So for me, I'd have one here. And you can see I've sort of based that not just on the candle before we moved out, but the 4 candles. I tend to draw my zones a bit wide and then refine them as I get smaller, as I get to smaller timeframes. But my thinking there is, I wouldn't want to have my trade set up like this. And if I just draw my zone off this candle, I might have my stop loss here and then see price come down, hit this part of the zone. I get stopped out, but it doesn't go through the zone and then it bounces off and I've been wicked out and could have made money. So I usually draw them a little bit wider and then refine them on these smaller time frames. Now you do also get zones that don't form on pivots. They form on pauses in the market. They're just a bit weaker. So here would be, in fact, probably here would be a perfect example because even though I'd normally, first instinct is to draw it here because, that's where we really moved up out of. When I actually think about it, if I draw the zone here, then we've retested it there and then moved up out. So I think this is a little bit stronger. Then I would come down to the dailies. Now we do have a daily supply zone because we have fallen out pretty strongly. I would be confident drawing a daily supply zone in there. As you can see, I've just drawn it on the wick, on the body of the candle before the drop. Now, because we're doing a supply zone, so supply is where people are happy to sell, they're happy to supply the asset. I've done the reverse. So I've drawn it from the top of the wick, even though I've gone off the candle before, top of the wick to the bottom of the body and ignored the wick to the downside on that candle. Now, if I'm refining my zones, there's also a huge daily zone here based on this pause. Now, I wouldn't actually take a trade off that zone because your stop's going to be huge. This is a perfect example of why I do refine my zone. So I'll come down and look at the 4-hour charts and see if I can find a zone within that daily area. And I will look for something like that because that's where it really pushed up and out. And as you can see, price came down and bounced from there. So just a quick example of how I trade the zones. I'll often have my stop just on the underside of the zone, my entry just above the zone, and go from zone to zone. So if I was in this trade, I'm not. But if I had taken that, I think it also lined up with the 30K mark roughly. Where's 30? So the bounce is almost exactly with the 30K, or just a bit above. But if I had taken that trade, I would be targeting up here. Now you can see it gets me huge risk to reward. Because I'm not waiting for confirmation, my entry is usually really good, and my stop is usually tight to still a reasonable degree. I'm not just putting it up here because that gives me a fat 18-to-1 risk to reward. It's got to be where it's got to be, but by doing it this way, you usually have really good risk to reward. So you can see here, if this goes up to the current daily supply zone, you're looking at about a 5-to-1, 6-to-1 trade. Now there's also a 4-hour zone. I would initially draw it in here because you can see the market came up, we consolidated, and it couldn't break through this zone, and then it fell out. So you can often end up with multiple zones because this is where the market actually really started to fall. If I'm ever looking to take a trade off zones like that, I'll just ladder. So I'll have an entry there based on this zone, an entry here based off that zone, and I would be looking for something that'll give me like an average entry like that. I'll be looking for something about like that. So I think that's about everything I wanted to cover. So the only other thing is, well, there's 2 things, sorry. As zones get penetrated like this, I'll get rid of that and I'll get rid of this one, just to make it a bit clearer. So you can see here that price has dug into that zone. That sort of reduces the strength of it. Because if you're assuming that this is all buy orders, a lot of those buys have been filled now. So that reduces the strength. Once it's been completely pierced, so to say we sort of wick like that, I won't remove the zone, but it does reduce my confidence in it a fair bit. And if I see closes below, then that zone is done. There is nothing going on there, and I'll remove the zone. Some people do use zones like support and resistance, in the sense that when support is broken, it becomes resistance. I don't personally use my zones that way, although I have seen it used pretty effectively. So it's not something that I'll really go into. The guy that I've seen use it is one of the Market Mastery crew. I can't think of his name, but they're Market Mastery on Facebook. So I've seen him use that to a ton of success. So again, I mean, yeah, I've learned supply and demand from that many different people. Can't remember all of them anymore, and everyone has slightly different tweaks on it. But I hope you guys learned something there. I hope it sort of shows you how I identify my zones, how useful they can be. I mean, if you look at that daily bounce from the March crash, it just shows you the accuracy of zones. The other thing, just in case I didn't mention it when I was talking about having multiple zones, you'll often find price will hunt the further zone. So, for this supply zone, when price is below it, you'll often find it'll hunt for the upper zone. And if it was two demand zones, one on top of the other, you'll often find it'll hunt for the lower zone. So you don't really want to be, let's say that you wanted to short from here, you wouldn't want to be shorting off that first zone with your stop just after it, because there's every chance it'll hunt that higher zone, hunt that liquidity, and you'll get stopped out. So yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. If I've forgotten anything, I might do a follow-up video at some point. If there's any questions, I'm happy to do a follow-up video. So yeah, I hope you guys learned something there, and I hope you're having a great day.